He's the author of the book of the Architecture of Virtual Space, which is actually what you will be presenting to us today. So thank you for being here, and your word.
Hello, good evening. I've never spoken with a handheld microphone before. That's a different experience. It will take me a little while to get used to it. I'm sure you will be able to understand that. So thank you for the presentation and the invitation to be here tonight with you. I will be needing this, but I prefer to not sit behind the table if possible. So again, thank you for being here. This evening's lecture will be a bit longer than you are used to. I heard you're used to 40 minutes lectures. I will do my best to keep you awake and interested. And this lecture will have a few parts, because to explain what it is actually about might take a little while, because what I will present to you is a completely different way of thinking. So it's a little bit of a process. This is also why the length, because to actually put across the point I want to put, I have to take you through a few steps, kind of reconsidering our way of understanding things, specifically with respect to the idea of virtual space. So this lecture actually combines two topics that normally we would consider them completely unrelated to each other, and yet here I will propose that they are still related. One of them is the analysis of the elusive idea of virtual space. What is virtual space? It's a kind of a term, it's a word that is a word virtual in general and word virtual space in particular. It's mentioned often. Do you hear me well enough with the distance of the microphone? Yes. This is completely new to me. I had these microphones and these microphones, but not this microphone. So one topic is the whole idea of virtual space. And the other topic is the world of pictorial art, with hundreds of years of art history, that actually there are many examples there that are filled with architectural content that might be very interesting to speak of from an architectural point of view. How do these two even relate? My interest in these fields started many years ago when I was an architectural student, and at some point I realized that I'm not interested in having a career making buildings. That's not what I'm about. And at the time, we're talking about the mid-90s, that was the rise of the internet. Of course, the technology existed, but that's the time when it kind of became part of general culture, general society. We all became more or less aware of it, even if we were not too much into computers. The development of new media, kind of reaching wide areas, and I was thinking, okay, that would be interesting to explore the possibility of making architecture somehow related to that. But I didn't exactly know what I was doing, so I went to study computer science and tried to explore it through that, and then went to work in all kinds of, anywhere that something that seemed somehow related. I just went and either studied it or worked in it for a while, trying to get an idea, how do these fields relate and connect? So now let me start from a bit of a different angle. You came here, most of you, I assume, just saw the newsletter or the poster, I don't know what you had here, just basic information on this lecture. And you're asking yourself, what might a lecture talking about the architecture of virtual space, what are we going to be talking about here? If you think of the word virtual, you might expect many different things. That is the nature of the current situation. We have this term, it's become very popular, but if we look closely, we will discover that it has many different meanings. So what I will start with is a quick, very shallow overview of what are the different meanings of the term virtual, to make clear what are we even going to be discussing this evening. So what would you expect that we're going to be talking about? The internet, computer programs, technology, maybe the social networks that are now running through the internet, the culture around social networks, online 3D worlds maybe, any kind of 3D world, video games. 3D graphics. I saw now 3D printing maybe. No, the imagination, human consciousness, collective consciousness, artificial intelligence, mix of humans and cyborgs and I don't know what. So all these things just come from our minds when we hear about virtual. So let's see what they are exactly. Let's differentiate between them. When we talk about computers, digital devices, the internet, and all of these things, online services, we use the word virtual in the sense of meaning digital. So when you say, oh, it's a virtual thing, actually when we stop to think, yeah, we're trying to say, yeah, it's something that uses computers. So yeah, it's virtual. In general, my approach doing this research was, if there's a better word to say something more accurately, well, use it. Virtual has so many other meanings that let's keep it for something that we don't find a better word for. So that's what I'm suggesting. Okay, when we're talking about computer things, digital. Then sometimes we use the word virtual and we want to say, oh, this is not real. It doesn't really exist. It kind of does, but not quite. So yeah, virtual. But this is more of a metaphysical issue, which is definitely out of the scope of our discussion today. But when we talk about these things, I think the word metaphysical serves better. Again, in this lecture, I'm not going to go in this direction, just kind of explaining to you which angle of virtuality are we even going to cover. So not this one. Then sometimes we use the word virtual when we talk about imagination, our minds, our dreams, our visions, things we can feel, things we can see, things we can create, but it's only in our mind's eye. They're not really out there. They do have a certain existence, but it's a very personal, private one. Mental. It's also a sense of using the word virtual. Again, not the one that we will be discussing this evening. This is another one. I'm working on it right now. Perceptual is the word that I found for it, because there is another sense of the word virtual, which is kind of a combination of the three that I mentioned before. When we talk about things that do have a certain degree of existence, there's one existence they have out there, yet the way we perceive them is different from the way they actually are, and they do have a certain existence. So we use the word virtual, again, because we don't know how exactly to give a word for that, to that. So virtual in the sense of perceptual, and that's a research I'm now doing, which will be published in a few months. So I will not speak about that at the moment, because that's not the point. And there is another meaning of virtual, a meaning that doesn't really have a word that we can, in one clear word replace it with. And that is when we talk about virtuality in the sense of 3D worlds, video games, film special effects, 3D creation tools. When you work on 3D Max or Maya or any of these programs, there's something virtual about what we create there. But it's not quite virtual in the sense that it is digital, because it's not, of course it's made with digital tools, but there's something else about it that makes it virtual. It's not quite virtual because it's non-real, non-existence in the metaphysical sense of the word. It's not quite in our imagination because we can see it, it's outside of us. It's not quite perceptual, it's not quite any of these things that I mentioned. It's something else. It's something that has to do with our perception of something through a flat object. Pixels on a screen, dots of ink on paper, oil on canvas. We see something through, and it feels that it has a certain existence, yet it doesn't. So that is the sense of virtual. It is one of the meanings of the term that is in common usage, but that is the one that I am going to focus on tonight. And in order to do that, we're going to have to be discussing much more than just computers. In fact, we will be discussing very little about computers. In order to understand that particular aspect of virtuality, we need to go back to art theory, to classical art, understand what is this phenomenon, how does it work. And with that understanding, we can return to contemporary technologies and create a complete understanding of virtuality in that particular sense. So the result of this research that I've been doing for many years is now in this book. And the image of the book is the next slide, this one. So for the rest of the lecture, what I will be doing, basically two parts. One, I will present an overview of the main ideas, what the book is about. And in the second part, go deeply and directly into the definition of virtual space as I'm proposing it to be. What I have to say about all this is that none of what I'm going to be speaking this evening, none of it is the truth. I'm not appointed officially by anyone to declare what virtual means. It's a word out there. I was interested in it personally because it's a field that I wanted to develop myself professionally in, and I needed answers, which I couldn't find anywhere. So eventually I formulated them for myself, and I will be sharing them with you tonight, and it's for you to choose whether they apply for you as well or not. So we could look at this work, the study, the written form of my process and conclusions as a work of media theory and as a work of architectural theory. Because like I said, the main topic tonight will be focusing on an understanding of pictorial media and on how architectural content creates our experience of space in pictorial mediums. How come we look at an image like this one and we do see a space? And the reason I chose this particular painting is because it has lots of paintings of architecture in it, even though in this case it's paintings of architectural ruins, but our discussion has to do with images of any kind of space and how the architecture creates the experience of it. So from the point of view of media theory, the point of this study is primarily to reconcile old media theory and new media theory and new media phenomena. Because with the rise of new media, along with it, maybe naturally, there was a kind of a general tendency to consider, oh, well, since we have a new media now, we don't need the old theories of paintings. They have nothing to teach us, so let's get rid of them. And what I'm going to be proposing here is that, well, there's still something to learn from there. If reinterpreted correctly, they could serve us in trying to understand what is happening today with the new mediums and the phenomena they bring with them. So at the heart of the study, what we will find is a methodical, systematic articulation of what virtual space is. As I mentioned before, virtual space can be considered as maybe talking about the internet, all these different meanings, and what I was trying to do is to provide a consistent meaning. Because with too many meanings, virtual ends up just being an empty buzzword which doesn't have any meaning. So in this fog of multiple meanings, just like I started in the opening of the lecture, and I will continue further, what I'm doing, I'm proposing to take this fog and draw a line arbitrarily and say, okay, virtual means only that, and the other meanings, even though of course they're very much in use, they will serve as metaphors for that. But the problem is, if virtual is a metaphor, what does it refer to? If I tell you that I now have butterflies in my stomach, whether you believe me or not is a different question, then you all know what I'm talking about. We know how butterflies look like when they fly. We know how we feel sometimes when we're a bit nervous, and we're like, oh yeah, this feeling I have, the butterfly, yeah, it's kind of similar. So I can use it as a metaphor and you immediately know what I'm talking about, because we all know the reference. If we try to use the word virtual metaphorically and we don't know what the reference is to, then we're in the fog. We have no idea what's going on. And somehow in our culture currently there's a feeling we kind of discuss and we assume that the other person thinks the same thing, but as you saw in the list in the beginning, there are at least 5 different things you can think of. So what are we talking about? So what I will be proposing is that virtual space is the space we perceive through pictorial media. Paintings, films, photographs, TV programs, video games, any kind of pictorial mediums. In other words, whenever we are dealing with a physical device, that's a physical thing. Something physical, a wall with dots of lights on it, dots of light. Whenever we deal with something like that, and yet through it, when looking at it, we experience something that is not physically here. Then, where is it? It's in virtual space. And if we see anything inside of it, if it's not here, it's in the space that we see, then that thing we see is virtual. So that chair on the left is a virtual chair, because it's not a physical chair such as this one here, it's located in virtual space. So that would be the definition of virtual. Now, once I came up with this interpretation, I realized, in discussion with some colleagues, that this actually resulted in an alternative theory of the pictorial image. This is actually, to my surprise, I discovered that I have an art theory on my hands. So then I proceeded further and realized, yeah, most approaches of discussing art, if you look at this painting and you look through the historical books of art theory, then you will find that a painting like this can be discussed in terms of the story, you know, what's the event, the technique, how was it made, or the painting itself and its story, who owned it, where did it go, Napoleon came, took it away, the Italians want it back, the French say no, you know, all true, by the way. So this is one of the aspects, and there are many of them, but there's much less discussion, and this is the one I'm proposing, to discuss paintings such as these in terms of the space that they create, and the space that we can see through them, and the architecture that creates this space. So this research, or this theory, draws on the metaphor, the Renaissance metaphor of a window to another world, and it expands it. The window is expanded to stand for all pictorial mediums, and the metaphor of the world extends to encompass all pictorial images ever made. And then tries to understand, okay, what kind of world is that? The world that is made of all pictorial images ever made? The result then provides a single systematic model for understanding all types of pictorial images. A unified approach which can be applied to any pictorial medium, any historical period, and any kind of technique. No matter what it is, whether it's an old, ancient vase painting or a contemporary flight simulator, same theory applies. And that's the way the the older theories of art can become useful again. Partially, not all of it, but some elements in it becomes useful for understanding what we're dealing with today. The other aspect is architectural theory. As a work of architectural theory, there are several relations to architecture. One of them is the fact that the topic of virtuality is central to architectural theory just as well. So by helping or proposing a certain systematic approach to what virtuality is all about, this is also very much related to architecture, which deals with these same topics. Another aspect is that architecture in its physically built form is known as the art of space. So if we want to understand the space of pictorial arts, then what better than using architecture for that matter? And indeed, we will find that architecture is often, very often used in pictorial arts. Sometimes as the background for images, sometimes as the frame to separate whatever is in the image from whatever is outside of the image. Sometimes architecture is used to provide the setting, such as in this painting by Rembrandt, where it provides a setting for a particular event. Sometimes architecture is the subject, that's the topic of the painting. Sometimes it's many of them together. It's a frame, it's the setting, it's the background. Another connection to architecture is that the designs themselves are very rarely discussed. There's actually a design process happening there. Somebody had to design the places that we see in all these paintings. Somebody has to design the places we see in the movies we go to, especially ones that do not just film in the streets of a familiar city. So again, historically, there's more interest in a painting like this. There's much more discussion about the characters and who they represent and so on. This painting by Raphael, the School of Athens. Only in a few lines you might find a description that, yeah, you know, the architecture, which covers most of the surface of the painting, it was designed by Bramante. These are, what you see there, the space, is the original designs for the Cathedral of St. Peter's. Eventually it was not built this way, it was changed over the long process of making it. But the original design is this one. So again, that's an example. But what is true that in film, there is a bit of discussion about architecture, such as in this example of Metropolis or the example of Blade Runner. But who discusses this? Mostly, okay, architecture a little bit, from the point of view of film theory a little bit, but art theory in general doesn't discuss these things. Architectural theory doesn't discuss these things. It discusses, okay, like I said, film a little bit, but architectural theory and history is interested more in this, masterpieces of the past, distant past, masterpieces of the more recent past, maybe a little bit of examples from architect visionaries, a little bit. But actually the discussion of architecture in the arts, in general, in the pictorial arts, architectural history and theory doesn't discuss it, and art history and theory doesn't discuss it either. Again, I'm making a generalization. Of course, there are exceptions, but as a general topic, it's beyond. Another relation is maybe more related to things that some of you might be doing here. It has to do with the evolution of virtual space at the moment in the digital sense of the word, virtual worlds and so on, where virtual space is expanding. If we take this definition of virtual space as the space we see through pictorial media in general, and now we have definitely new kinds of pictorial media, new ways of creating such spaces, then how are we going to build them? What are we going to do there? And if we want to understand these possibilities, we better have a good understanding of what the space is all about. Otherwise, how exactly are we going to build there? We don't even know the site. First rule of architecture, know your site. Do we know the site when we think of building in virtual space? Just to give a few examples. I'm giving it as a joke, actually. These are some snapshots from, I always forget its name, Second Life. You think, wow, you can do anything there. If you can do anything, then why does it look like this? Of course, I'm sure there are good designs out there. And my apologies if any of you has designed this. You know, please don't be offended. I'm just trying to make a point. And finally, this theoretical articulation of virtual space, trying to define a field by combining so many other fields, linking in so many. It's a very architectural thing to do, basically. Trying to correlate, bring together so many fields together into the creation of an overall understanding of how they relate to each other. Art theory, film theory, information design, digital imaging, media theory, and so on. So the result is what I call the virtual space theory. So what I will do now, I will lead you through the core, the basic rules, what the virtual space theory proposes as an understanding of what virtual space is. First rule. What is the Spanish word? Nada? Nada. There's no such thing. It's a word. It's It's a word, it's a term, has many meanings, nothing consistent about it. All I'm trying to do here is to propose a certain meaning, narrowing down the many uses of it into what we see through pictorial media. So as a whole, this body of principles that I will be presenting to you, again, it's not something that you have to believe, it's not something that I need to prove, it's something that I'm proposing. So virtual space is a visible space. That's the first understanding. It starts from looking at the word space and realizing that it has two main uses. We can use the word space to speak about things that are visual. We can use the word space to think about things that are conceptual. So let's distinguish between them. When we talk about the internet in terms of space, just a sample Google search, sure, we can talk about the internet in terms of space. Yeah, I'm browsing through this space. But sure, visually we look at this, but the space we talk about when we talk about internet as a space is not a visual space. It's a conceptual way that we for ourselves, it's convenient to discuss it in terms of space. We don't see the space of the internet. Virtual space, on the other hand, as I'm defining it tonight, is a visual kind of space. We need language, we need words to discuss it, but what we're discussing or talking about is visual. The essence and the contents are visual. The next principle is that virtual space is one of the three spaces that can be visually experienced. So if we narrow down the use of space to the visual ones, what I'm proposing here is that there are only three such spaces. Physical space, mental space, and virtual space. Mental space is a general term that I use in the sense of what we see in our mind's eye. If I ask you all to close your eyes for a moment and imagine an apple, see it. Okay, now where is it? Let me ask another question. Can you guess what is the color of the apple of the person sitting next to you? Ah, not so easy. So the experience of this apple, the definition, the term I will use for this is to say where the apple is that this apple is in your mental space. And mental space is a private phenomenon. You cannot see the apple, you cannot see the mental space of anyone else except for your own. Then we have physical space, our immediate tangible environment. This apple here. Okay, that's a physical apple. Of course you all can see it, and of course you will all see it a little bit different, but still the reference is out here. You can eat it later if you want. Whoever wants comes first. First come, first serve. Virtual space then is the space we can experience through pictorial images of any medium. So these apples here, and it doesn't matter whether it's a painting, a photograph, or computer-generated images. A computer-generated image. All these apples are different from this apple. You can eat this. There's no way you can eat any of those. And it's different from the one that you had in your mental space, because in your mental space it was private, and this one is public. It's as public as the physical one, and yet it's different from the physical, obviously. So these are the three kinds of space. So that is these are examples of virtual space, and each of these is a virtual apple, including the photograph of a physical apple. Once it's a photograph, what you see in the photograph is in the same kind of space as what in this general categorization of three spaces. Even if it's a photograph, it's in virtual space. What's special about virtual space is our ability to access it is through a physical device. There's a physical object, this wall, this screen, that allows us to perceive it. Which brings us to the window metaphor. Starting with the Renaissance, the idea from Alberti in 1420 something wrote his treatise on image and suggested that looking at a painting is like looking through a window and looking out into a certain world that can be seen through that window. He came up with this idea as a way to help painters, to teach painters what to do, or to guide them. So this metaphor will help us here. It's one of the principles of the virtual space theory, but it's not limited only to perspective. It doesn't matter, an image can even look like this, completely unrealistic in the optical sense of how space works. And yet, just because what we see here is not just light on the surface, we actually can see a space here, even though it doesn't really work the way we can see a space in the harbor, not far from here, it still creates a space. The next principle is that virtual space is the sum of all virtual places. What does that mean? It means that one virtual place is located in its own image space, such as this, by Canaletto. This space exists in its own image space, but if we take them together, the space of one and the space of the other, and another one, and put them together, we result in an overall entity, which is what I call, or what I propose is the meaning of the term virtual space. Of course, such an entity is obviously fragmented. There's no way you can move from this space and get to the other one. It's not a continuous space like our physical world is. So how do I even make this jump, this mental or conceptual jump? Okay, here comes the part where using a microphone is difficult, so for a moment. Can you hear me? Okay, good. So, back to the apple. I brought 2 apples originally, but I was hungry. I ate one quick. I forgot that there was a reason why I had 2. If you take an apple and an apple, and an apple, try to put them together, there will always remain 2 apples. They don't turn into one. So how can I say now that you can take a space and a space, put them together and get a larger space? Well, think of it in this term. It's called the space inside the bottle space. It's called the space inside this bottle, also bottle space. Of course, I don't bring them together, but can I speak in terms of bottle space as a phenomenon that is separate from non-bottle space, even though they're not continuous to each other? That's the sense I mean. So the water in here is inside of bottle space. Doesn't really matter inside of which one of the 2 bottles, it's within bottle space. So that is the sense in which I'm proposing the definition of virtual space as the sum of all virtual places within their local spaces. The next principle is that virtual space is a limitless and discrete space. Limitless because you can always add more to it. Make another image, which is a large virtual space. Discrete, just like I said, it's separate. Each one of them has its own end within itself. You cannot pass from this bottle to this bottle directly. The next principle is that the characteristics of particular places inside the virtual space, they are based on it. It cannot be just anything. They're based on the world as we know it, physical world, visual. Simple exercise will emphasize the point. I can take the knife back. Is it better with or without? With, okay. So imagine a place that has 5 physical dimensions and no gravity. And you're an architect and you're designing a place, you're designing a house in there. Now I'm going to ask you to make an image of your design. What are the chances that the image that you will make will be understandable to others? An image of a 5-dimensional space with no gravity, and then there are architectural designs in there. My guess is that it will look pretty much like a painting by Jackson Pollock. A splash of, and something quite ununderstandable. Why? Because images, and that is something I did not discuss today because I'm trying to keep it short, right? There's a certain set of rules of how images are created so that when we look at them, we actually see a space. And the rules are, one of the basic ones, it has to look in a way that is similar to the way we see the physical world. So that we look at the image and our eyes reacts to what we see similarly to our reaction around us. If it's too different, we're lost. We don't see a space there anymore, we just see patterns on the surface. So the magic of an image just doesn't work anymore. So in order for virtual places to function, they have to rely on the way the physical world does. They can break the rules a little bit. And we all like it when they break the rules. It's always fun. But still, if you look closely, it's very, except for the one rule of gravity that is played with here, everything else is very strict and follows the rules of how we experience the physical world. Then, of course, different places inside a virtual space can be different from each other. The fact that one place breaks the rules doesn't mean that all of them have to break the rules. They're independent. For example, the one to the left follows the rules of physics. Well, maybe the architecture is a bit extreme, and there has been some argument about that. But the one to the right, for example, plays with the rules. The horizon is higher on one side and lower on the other. So, and of course we can find many other examples of playing with the rules, and they apply for each particular place separately. And of course, as we started, virtual space is a public space. Anyone can add places to virtual space. Anyone can experience virtual places. All you need is access to the physical device, which I call a device of illusion, the physical device that provides us with the view of it. Like I said before, our experience of this might be a bit different, but the reference is just as public as this room is public, in the sense that we can see it. It's not just in our minds. So that would be a short overview of the essence of the definition of virtual space. Now, before ending this lecture or moving to the questions and answers section, I would like to say a few things about what virtual space is not. Because upon hearing such a description, such an interpretation, naturally as humans we learn by comparison. We listen to something, we're like, oh, this sounds similar. What is it similar to? Oh yeah, I heard something, but it's a bit different. We use a reference. Understandable. But I want to warn from these references, so I'm just going to say what virtual space is not, just to make sure. So here is a partial list. So virtual space, as I define it today, it's not spiritual, it's not the world of ideals, philosophers, Plato and several others. It's not a parallel reality, it's not utopia, it's not the imagination, it's not collective imagination either. It's not a fantasy, it's not our dreams, it's not a hallucination, it's not fiction, it's not the idea of potential, another philosophical idea out there, it's not the idea of hyperreality, it's not a computer-generated space, it's not cyberspace, it's not hyperspace, and it's not virtual reality, or what I call VR, or not I call, it's an acronym of it, is this device with the helmet you put on, not what I'm talking about. As we will, if we actually, in the book I discuss this of course in much more depth, why and what is the difference between each of them and the idea of virtual space. But if we look quickly, we will see that some of them are conceptual ideas and they have nothing visible, and our discussion today was about the visual world, or visible senses of the term space. Some of them have to do with our mental space, some of them have to do with physical space. Some of them are somehow related to virtual space, but none of them is identical to the idea of virtual space as I presented to you today. The proposed definition of virtual space is rather this one. Virtual space is the sum of all pictorial images ever made, for which physical devices of illusion are available and make their virtual places visually accessible. So if you have in your mind anything different than this, and you think that's what I said tonight, then it's not. You know this list I gave before? I'm sure you could add more to this. So all these things are not virtual space, not according to the virtual space theory. So I would like to end with matters of terminology. How come we need to even have this discussion? How come there's so much of a terminological mess? And I have my own personal opinion about that, which I will share with you now. Well, over the last decades, there's been so much development, technological, and everything that results from the technology. The uses of technology, how it affects us, our thinking, our understanding, social effects, and we just don't have enough words to keep up with the developments. So, not having enough words, we use a few token words to cover a range that would need many separate ones. So I'm kind of now running after trying to clean up and then coming here to propose, what, maybe you want to use it? And one of the sources of the confusion is the popular idea of virtual reality. Virtual reality, which is a technical name given to a particular technological device. The idea that you can create computer-generated images, put a helmet on your head, the images will be projected, and if you turn your head, the images will be adjusted, so you will feel as if the image will change as consistently as what you see changes in the physical world. And then you would have maybe also sound, and maybe a data glove, and so on, making it more and more convincing, let's say. But the name virtual reality, there's nothing wrong with the technology, but the choice of name, which was brilliant from a point of view of marketing, kind of captured the imagination of a whole civilization, but practically doesn't really explain what this thing actually is. It became more like an oxymoron, like it became something catchy, which again, it was catchy because it was like two opposites. Oh, virtual reality. So it's reality, but it's not actual reality. It's virtual reality. So virtual and real are two opposites. So if something is virtual, then it's not real. That's what we tend to think. That's what we inherited from the culture that we live in. And according to the virtual space theory, on the other hand, if we look at this painting again, the opposite of virtual in this context is not real. The opposite of virtual is physical. So, for example, if you're in doubt, you hear the word virtual running around, or kind of somebody says it, or you read it somewhere and you're wondering, what do they mean by that? So you can replace the word virtual with non-physical and see if it works. It's one thing you can do. On the other hand, another possibility, if it's very clear that the discussion is about visual things, then you can think of the word virtual in terms of location rather than in terms of equality. So for example, where's my apple? There. Is the apple red? Okay, it's green here, but is the apple red? It's a question about the quality that the apple has. But if I say, is the apple virtual? You can think of it instead of meaning, is the apple in virtual space? It's a matter of location. So is the apple in virtual space? No, the apple is in physical space. So is Bruegel Tower, okay, let's try it again. Is the Eiffel Tower virtual? Okay, this is a photograph, but I'm talking about the physical Eiffel Tower in Paris. Is the Eiffel Tower virtual? No, it's a physical tower located in Paris. Is the Tower of Babel as painted by Bruegel? Is it virtual? Yes, it's located inside a virtual space. Is the painting virtual? No, the painting is not located in virtual space. The painting is located in physical space in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. And right now, as it's dots of light on the wall in IAAC, as I just heard it's called IAAC. Okay. So now that we've separated, we said, okay, virtual is the opposite of physical. It's not the opposite of real. So what do we do with the word real in there? Let's continue with the example of the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower in Paris and the Eiffel Tower in Vegas, Las Vegas. So what's the story with this tower over there? I mean, you can see it's mentioned in so many books of both philosophy and contemporary philosophy and architectural theory, of course. Like, what's going on there? So I will propose my own interpretation. So is it virtual? Sometimes the word virtual is used there, but we already know that it doesn't really work. At least not according to the virtual space theory. But okay, the real tower is this one. So what's going on there? You can say fake, you can say copy, you can say all kinds of things, but I think none of it really captures the essence of the issue. There's a fancy word in philosophy books called simulacrum. What is a simulacrum? A simulacrum is a simulated object. It's an object that simulates something else than what it is. So you could say the Eiffel Tower in Las Vegas is a simulacrum of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. So we have, and now I need my hands again. We have virtual and physical, virtual and real. That's what we're used to think. They're opposites of each other. Separating them, we have virtual and physical, and now real and simulacrum. So real is the opposite of simulacrum, virtual is the opposite of physical. Now we're ready for the big one. What about this one? This is the castle from the film Sleeping Beauty, and of course there's a story. It was the design of it was inspired by Neuschwanstein in Bavaria and so on, but we're talking about now not the inspiration, but the castle in the film Sleeping Beauty. It's also has become a symbol of Disney in general, so much so that when you go to theme parks, you're very likely to find this. This is in Euro Disney in Paris. And the question that we will end with which is real? Any suggestions? Which is the real castle? Huh? Well, this one is the simulacrum of this one. So the simulacrum is in physical space. The real castle is in virtual space. And that's the main point. Things can be virtual and real. The question of virtual and real, it's like saying, is it blue or is it a tomato? What's the connection? These are completely two different discussions. Where is it and whether it's real? Of course, there's a long discussion, which is real. So, what is the essence of real? That's a valid discussion, not for today. Maybe if you will want the questions, answers, but not necessary. And the whole other question is, where is it? It's in virtual space. This is in physical space. So the Eiffel Tower is real. It's a real physical tower. Bruegel's Tower is real. It's a real virtual tower. The Tower of Saruman in the film Lord of the Rings is very real. Real within the context of the film. The reason it's so hard for us to agree with this idea is because we're so used to think of virtual as meaning non-real, rather than meaning non-physical. I didn't discuss reality today because I believe it's safer to leave reality, that's a discussion of its own. Leave it to metaphysics without adding adjectives, virtual reality or physical reality or the real reality, forget it. The discussion today was not a discussion about reality, it was a discussion about the visible world and trying to provide an understanding of it and give us tools to have words for discussing it. And the visible world, as we saw, includes, apart from our mental space, which is private, it includes physical space, and it includes virtual space. So the issue of virtuality, to conclude, as I see virtuality, it's not a matter of technology. It's a matter of place and space. It is a place where we can build simulation of future physical buildings. It's a place where we can document existing buildings. It's a place where we can reconstruct ancient buildings. It's a place where we can do much more than that. Digital technology allows us to do it, but in order to do it, it's not just about, oh, I'm using a computer. It's a very limited way of looking at what the essence of it is all about. It's about building in virtual space. It's about understanding what kind of space it is that you're going to build inside of, and understanding what it means. It might seem like it's just a matter of semantics, but semantics create a context. And context is what everything in this discussion is all about. It can produce a fundamental difference in how we use the tools, even if we're just using computers in the end. Additionally, having this understanding of virtual space provides the ability to use it for much more than representing things that are existing in physical space, have existed, will exist, but to actually